Hello, everybody. Can you hear me well?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you great. It's great to see you. Great to hear you.
All right, looks like it's that time. Brandon, you started us about 30 seconds early, but that's okay.
Oh, that's okay. I know how people are. We're just casual here, though, right? I mean, come on.
Yes. And I need to just mute this site because otherwise I am not going to be able to hear and listen and whatnot. Well, hey, listen, I appreciate both you and Claire. I will let you introduce yourselves in just a minute. But you can hear me okay, right?
Hear you great.
Yeah,
Hey,
you
Claire.
sound.
Awesome. Okay, just making sure because sometimes my microphone is a little bit off, especially when I have my headphones in. But folks, welcome to our unofficial Lit and Lang prompt chat for 2026. We're going to use the release prompts here today. We've got Dr. Braden Abden here. We have Claire Antune, and we have Gandalf. Gandalf came home today, and I was like, "Ooh, we're going to make sure he comes and hangs out with us." You're going to notice it on our screen super quick. We do have some things that the Garden of English is doing this summer, and some of our other partners are doing this summer as well. So you will see that we have Garden of English workshops, and we encourage you to consider signing up for that. We have workshops, Garden of English workshops for AP English language teachers. We have Garden of English workshops for AP English literature teachers, and we have Garden of English workshops for secondary English teachers. And those are run by Susan Barber, me, and of course Dr. Brandon Abden. And some of our friends join up as well. Folks, we're going to continue to keep this stuff free on YouTube, but this is one of the ways that allows us to do so. We hang out with our sponsors. So, this right here can help us do that. On top of that, Brandon has some book clubs with applied practice and a post-exam celebration. Brandon, I was not able to get the register now link to work for that, but you can probably get that at Perfection. But why don't you talk about those super quick for just a moment, and then we'll get right into things.
Yeah, that's great. You can hear me all right?
Oh, I can hear you just fine.
Fantastic. So, yeah, I will get the registered links and drop them into the chat here at some point within the next hour to get all that going. But yeah, so next week we do this every year. It's just a time for AP teachers to get together, chat, share some successes, share some things that they tried, took a chance with, and not knowing if it was going to work. But also maybe share some things that are tried and true. But celebrate too. This is a chance to really talk about that kid that worked really hard all year. You didn't know if they were going to get there, but you know that they went into the exam and they kicked butt.
Yeah.
Whether or not they got a 3 or a 2, you know that they did their best. And it's really a great opportunity to celebrate those sorts of things. We do give away some books and some class sets of novels and things like that. So please feel free to jump on to that next Wednesday.
Awesome.
It's free. And again, I'll put the registration link in the chat. And then our same thing for the, and it looks like, Tim, you've got the QR code on there, so that's fantastic. The book club, we do one through Applied Practice, totally free. Well, you do have to buy the book. But we do one for AP English Language, and we do one for AP English Literature. Lots of people end up doing both. But we meet 3 times throughout the summer. The final time we meet, we usually have a guest that joins us. It's either an expert. Last year it was their authors of the books who joined us.
Awesome.
This year, I'm keeping that secret for now, who our guests are going to be, but we will have some guests. But you also, just by participating, you get access to some materials, some AP-aligned materials, some things you could use, some passages from the books. And this year we're doing a book in language called Bibliophobia that I'm rereading now. And it's one of the books that it lives rent-free in my brain. So much talking about the power of books and what we do to kids sometimes with books, and the writer talking about her own experience with them. I'm trying not to give too much away, but just a beautiful memoir. And then the other one is called Ednon. It is a translation of a novel in verse, and is absolutely beautiful as well. I've just finished rereading it, knowing we were going to be doing it, because I promised people we'd do a novel in verse. And so, again, you're welcome to check it out. The dates we're going to meet are on here. If you can't make all the dates, it's fine. Don't care.
And just so you all know, the links for these are in the description down below, except for the post-exam celebration, which is that free webinar, but Brandon will get that in the links in the chat very, very soon. Now, folks, Brandon and I have been doing this for a couple of years now, but you will see a new face this year. And Claire, I think you were actually supposed to join us last year, but that fell through at the last minute, if I remember correctly. But if that's not true, then call me a liar and tell us who you are, tell us where you're from, tell us what you do, and then we'll get right into things.
I teach AP Literature and AP Seminar in El Dorado, Arkansas. It's a very rural area, but we're really lucky to have like some high enrollment. Looking at 100 AP Lit kids next year. And
Oh, that's excellent.
I know I had about 70 this year, and so I'm glad that I stayed optimistic and bought 115 of every book a couple years ago. And
Yeah.
and I'm teaching an AP seminar for the first time this year as an interdisciplinary English class. I love it. It really stretched me in new ways, and so I'm like a learner here too with you guys, and just excited to be here hanging out in the Garden of English and excited to talk about some prompts.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to actually start moving these prompts over so we could share these up. I have to make sure I get the right ones, not the Lang ones. The Lang ones will happen a little bit later. But Claire, it's super nice to have you. It's super nice to see you too, Brandon, as we get into this. So let's actually do that. Brandon, I see that looks like you're on a treadmill right there, and I'm going to ask that you actually pick up that speed just a little bit, because I'm about to share my screen, and that is going to allow us to actually have a conversation about our question 1 here. Now, it just so happens that I purposefully chose not to have any experience with the questions before our discussion here. I hardly even glanced at them the day that they were released, even though I wanted to, because I was like, you know what? I want to take this as authentically as I possibly can as I talk with Brandon and Claire, because I was like,
self-control.
I know, right?
I did that last year, and I loved it because it made me really think about how the students were going to think about things as soon as they saw them.
Absolutely.
So I'm glad you did that, Tim.
Right. And so to be clear, I have looked at them. I glanced at them earlier today, like honestly, a glance, not even a thorough read, because I was like, no, we're going to talk about this as is. So please note, folks, that these are linked right in the description down below, along with other things that we have for you. So you can access these, but we'll also display these. These are publicly released from the College Board, so I want to make sure that nobody thinks that we're infringing on copyrights or anything like that. But let's actually take a look at these here, and let's talk about them. I'm going to read the prompt, and I'll actually read the poem, and then Brandon and Claire, I'm going to let you all take it away after that. So we'll read the prompt first, though, and let's actually talk about some ways that we would think about the prompt before we would dig into the poem here. And Claire, we're going to start with you, so I'll ask the question when we're done. But the prompt for question 1 here reads as follows. In Christopher Gilbert's poem, Marking Time, published in 1984, the speaker observes his surroundings during a morning jog.
I didn't realize we signed up for a dramatic reading of the prompt.
Oh, I know,
Like
I know.
I love it. I love it. Go ahead. Keep going.
Read the poem carefully. Then, in a well-written essay, analyze how Gilbert uses literary elements and techniques to convey the speaker's complex reflections while jogging. So Claire, my first question for you is going to be this, right? Assuming that your kids are not going to just dig right into the poem, they're going to try to process the prompt first so they can make sure that they can AP, which of course does not stand for agony and pain, but rather answer the prompt. That's right. Or address the prompt. That's right. What are you going to focus on with your kids if you're in your classroom and you're saying, hey, listen, if you get a prompt like this is what you need to do with this prompt before you even start reading the poem. What's the advice you're going to give your kids?
Well, one conversation, thankfully, we had, sort of the week before the exam, as I said, College Board is not going to give you anything you don't absolutely have to have. Okay? They're not going to give you anything that if they give it to you in that prompt, you need it to function. Okay, that you needed to be able to step into the text with like a fair amount of knowledge. And so again, I would hope that my students would see like, okay, we have time in the title, like so it's marking time. Okay, am I looking at time? Is time passing? The fact that he's observing, like so we already know that it's about a speaker, like from their point of view, someone who's in the poem, kind of looking at their surroundings, and the fact that it's in the morning is ideal. I think, kind of in pivotal for the piece, if they're thinking, okay, it's a new day, like something's just starting. And just kind of thinking about one thing we talked about too is there's really only so many themes in the world, and like there's different variations of them, right? There's like having love, losing love, the world is beautiful, the world is terrible, let's party, carpe diem, right? Time. And so I feel like this, like, kind of, not to say that like there's no poems that don't fit in one of those categories, but most poems and songs and movies, they're going to fit kind of at least tangentially into one of these. So hopefully the students see the idea of time, and the fact that he's like going through some kind of movement to kind of think about, well, what is the big idea here?
I think you just inspired me, Claire, because I'm going to now make a poster that's called Every Theme Ever, and I'm going to take those categories. So I'm going to text you a little later and say, what are those categories again? And we're going to turn it into a really fun poster, and I'll send you a copy because that's awesome. Good.
I watch them try to think of a song that doesn't fit in one of those categories, and they really struggle. And
what's
like, no, that fits in that one. So
what's amazing is I'm thinking about Frankenstein right now, and I think Frankenstein actually hits every single one of those. So no matter how much they seem like there's a dichotomy. But okay, Brendan. So we got what Claire added. What Claire said she would have the kids look for. But what are you going to focus on as you help your kids approach the prompt before they read the poem?
Yeah. So in addition to things that Claire said, because I would want them to notice certain things and what associations they bring to it. So if they see morning, what do we know about mornings? What do we think about mornings? Hey, we see jogging. Well, what do we think about jogging? Some kids might like, it sucks. I'm like, well, okay, but what do you know about jogging? All right. But one of the things I would hope they would pick up on, because these, just like Claire's themes, these prompts always fall under certain things. And it coincidentally happens to be, or not coincidentally, it just happens to be the big ideas in the course. And so when they see the word surroundings, I hope they think setting immediately.
Yeah.
And that the setting is going to matter. And how setting, in AP, we learn that setting is not just about where the thing happens and when it happens, as they've learned through middle school and through early high school and things. But we really get into the idea that, hey, setting matters.
Yeah.
Setting reflects stuff, or setting prepares us for certain things. And so maybe if we're looking at the setting and the morning, if they start seeing things that don't click with that, I hope they would immediately start recognizing irony. If they start seeing things come up that don't go with the morning, that don't go with things that they might expect in these surroundings in the morning, they start seeing some irony here. I'm not saying that's in the poem, but things I would want them to think about, and why it's so important to spend time unpacking the prompt. Not just thinking about what the prompt says, but actually spending time and unpacking it. And then the other thing with jogging is I hope that they think about some of the kids who are runners. Claire, I know you're a runner. I used to be a runner. I'm still now very much a slow walker. But that some of the kids might get this idea that, when you're out running or jogging, that's time for reflection. That is time for yourself. And so some of the kids may associate that. But I also want them to start thinking about that complexity. Yeah. So what might be some conflict? What might be some of the yin to the yang here? And just like what Claire said about the different themes, anytime they see complexity, I want them to think, okay, there's going to be some sort of contrast. There's going to be some sort of juxtaposition. We know that big L literature, as David Miller told us, big L literature is complex. But thinking about conflict too, is there going to be internal conflict? Is there going to be conflict between him and something else and something in nature? And conflict usually falls along, you don't have to beat me out, YouTube, but conflict usually falls along power, sex, and money. And ultimately those come down to power in some way. And so be thinking about those things while they read. Now, we're not trying to create a bunch of skeptics, but we do want kids to be critical of what they're seeing. And so, yeah, lots of things here to think about in the prompt. And I'm really glad that we start out talking about the prompts like this, Tim, to really mirror that. That it's not just, hey, let's jump right into text.
Yeah.
Well, I
And
think too, oh, sorry, Tim.
no, go on ahead, Claire.
I was just going to say that, I teach a lot of students who have a lot of rich experiential knowledge that they bring with them to the class. But I think
Awesome.
sometimes they forget that that knowledge can be brought to their academic life. And so
Yeah.
I totally agree with Brandon and like tapping into the resources that your students already have, because like even if they're not joggers, they're not runners, like they do have some knowledge before you even dive into this text.
Right. And actually, when we think about what kids struggle with the most, which is commentary, right? Commentary is the articulation of an inference. And an inference, right? I've changed Jim Burke's definition a little bit, but an inference is essentially new knowledge mixed with known experience to create a judgment. And so, because of that, right? I actually, when I was reading the poem, I used to be a cross country runner, and I was actually thinking about what would I do when I was on the cross country trail, and I was running, and I was kind of going through this element here. The only thing that I would do here, right, is if I were teaching this to my students, is I would make them actually write out the question. What is the speaker's complex reflections while jogging, so that the students can kind of recognize that the complexity or that conflict or that irony or whatever you guys want to call it, or that yin and that yang are really supposed to be focused on the speaker's reflections, as opposed to anything else. So that doesn't mean that the setting can't be complex, which can also then tie to the reflection. But of course, it's one of those things where I always tell my kids, answer the prompt. They want you to focus on the complex reflections here. And that might be how the reflections mix with the setting and things like that. One other thing, Brandon, when you mentioned setting earlier, with the nature of surroundings, I always teach my kids that there are essentially three types of setting. There's the geographical setting, which is your common time and place, like you had mentioned. There's the social setting, which is the relationships that surround and influence how a character acts. And then there's the political setting, which is kind of like the power dynamics that are set up just by existing within any type of area. And as I read the poem, when he starts bringing up his sister, I was like, oh yeah, this is where we can actually start bringing in that kind of social setting. What are the relationships here that influence how the speaker's thinking and whatnot? So, all right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a read, and let's try to go through this as chronologically as we can, as we kind of discuss the speaker's complex reflections while jogging. And like I said, Brandon, you're going to have to turn that up to about a 3 while I read this here, okay? So here's our
jogging. Let's just do that.
marking time, a dramatic reading apparently. Here we go. Folks, always remember, poetry is read to the punctuation, not the line. Here we go. Jogging out in the morning against the few high clouds, the blue sky is a memory like a sheer silk fabric, held so far back I can't see through it. When I breathe the new air, my body is young all over. A smell reminds how the 2 pear trees are white again, their flowers ephemeral, as the words I recite pass time in repetitious, wheezed breath. Squirrels, blue jays, down trees for the markers to say how far I've gone, to be used in their brief names to crowd my mind with anything I can count on. Today, as I struggle against the wind up the hill, I will catch a small butterfly, wavering with spread wings, and remember, dreaming of my sister who called last night when I was sleeping, and how 20 years ago she gave me from the held darkness of her brown palms a black butterfly with yellow specks. What it was, she said, is immaterial. There is the gesture, though. And watching a bird overhead fly past the disk of sun, there is a flaring shadow fanned down from above that flickers like a rustled page with a poem on it. It is that quick flute darkness of a sister's voice a brother will hear in his heart when he's breathing deep enough. End of the poem. So, okay, our kids get this. They have to think about that complex reflection that he's having while jogging, or that our speaker is having while jogging. And we want to start and try to go as chronologically as possible. So Claire and Brandon, I'm going to let you all begin taking it away. What are some things that you're recognizing, that you're noticing, that you're hoping that your kids will notice, and hopefully your kids even wrote about?
Claire, I insist you go first.
Well, I just felt so grateful that I put the word ephemeral in the letter to my students that they got right before the test.
Well,
But I did
hold on,
notice,
Claire. I'm going to interrupt you for just 1 second. I like that you. I appreciate that you brought that up, only because I'm surprised they didn't footnote that. Like
yeah,
recently, with what they have
right.
been footnoting, I was like, I can't believe they didn't footnote that. But anyway, sorry. Keep going.
Yeah, and that was my favorite word when I took AP Lit. I would like work it into every essay, and that was like we were talking about it. But
As
that
long as
word,
it's not plethora, I'm happy with it. Sorry,
um,
Tim knows I have a PTSD moment with plethora. So,
Oh
I
yeah.
use I will use that in every conversation we ever have now.
oh, great.
But I noticed though there were a lot of things here in the first, a lot of imagery and things that were metaphorical in the first several lines, lines 1 through 14 that are brief. They're fleeting. They're things that don't last very long. And talking about the memory disappearing, the flowers on the pear trees, kind of passing through the brief names, crowding his mind. So all of these items are moving in and out. They're not lasting for an extended period of time, which probably sets us up some for the end of the poem. And then I think like one thing I would hope that students would see is like the laboriousness of this jog, like that this
Oh,
is
yes.
someone who is really giving it everything he's got, not Brandon right now. He's at a nice easy pace. He's in zone 2 on his Garmin,
Yeah.
but someone who's really just like
That's being
pushing
generous.
themselves. Yeah. Okay, zone 1. I was trying to be nice. But and the idea like this wheezed breath, like he takes a deep breath and he feels kind of renewed and just sort of struggling against the wind here.
Yeah.
So hopefully seeing that in this
To
initial
build
part of the
off of,
poem.
I'm sorry, you cut out, Claire. I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry.
I think we're good, Brendan.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, to build off, I'm so glad you said that because the first time I'm reading through the poem, I'm getting a feeling for what's happening to it, but certain things started jumping out to me that didn't seem to click with elsewhere. So in line 10, this repetitious breath is now wheezing. And then in the next line, I see squirrels, blue jays, and I see downed trees. And then in line 15, I see, today as I struggle. And so there's this sense of struggle. There's this sense of pain that's being experienced by the person running. And if you'll scroll down for me, Tim.
Yep. Give me 1 sec. Give me 1 second. Yep. Keep going.
Okay. And so, the shift, we got the three sentences here, and I love the way you read it, Tim. The only difference between a poem and prose is the line, and you were reading to the punctuation. So thank you for that. We essentially have the three sentences here. One is, morning jog. The next one is today.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got that time, moving forward a little bit, and then what was said. Go back up. I'm so sorry.
Nope.
Yeah, there at line 23, what it was she said is immaterial. And so we're being pulled back in time though, but these things, that the words don't matter. But then the flaring shadow, the flickers like a rustled page. So the flute darkness of a sister's voice. So I'm seeing, even though we're making these observations about these things that are going on, and there's this imagery of beauty, I'm still seeing some pain and some struggle in here
Yeah.
too. It makes me start thinking about that yin and yang, or that complexity, and I couldn't ignore that. So those things that imagery, that kind of pain and struggle stood out to me, as well as the three sentences and the way those sentences move through time, as one does when they jog,
Yeah.
moving through space and time.
Yeah. One of the things that I actually really appreciated about this particular poem that I did not appreciate about last year's poem was I spent so much time in my AP Lit classes teaching my kids about caesura and enjambment and punctuation and how it really, really matters. And then last year, there was no punctuation in the release poem that my kids had. And I was like, oh my gosh, like my kids were ready to talk about everything. and
It's
they
like the
had.
first time that it happened, like ever. So
I know, I know,
Yeah, did they
but
talk about the lack of punctuation?
probably
well,
not. Honestly, they came in and they were like, there was no punctuation. We couldn't even talk about it. And I was like, okay, well, hopefully you did other things. They did fine. But one of the things that I actually appreciate about this particular poem as it builds, right, is before we get to the reflection about the sister, we have the description of the jog, as you both all mentioned, right? But as I look at the punctuation as it comes in, the first four lines are all in jammed, right? And I think about when I go out for a jog and I'm just ready to go, right? I'm ready to go and it just keeps going. And then we have our first kind of like dash. And then the next line has caesura. And then we start seeing things get broken up a little bit here, all the way up to the wheezed breath. And then it talks about the downed trees for markers. So as this guy is going through his jog, notice that, he's potentially slowing down a little bit, or at least he's looking for markers of kind of being repetitive, right? And then sure enough, as he's looking for markers, we're getting more punctuation involved in the lines. And so we get to kind of go through the experience of the jog with this guy with the punctuation as he begins to start moving towards a reflection. And when I see that he's starting to move towards this reflection, he's looking for markers to say how far I've gone, and then to be used in their brief names to crowd my mind with anything I can count on. So now he's starting to, crowd his mind, and this is where he starts to become extra pensive. And this is when he's starting to shift towards, we think about the morning jog, like in the bright sunlight, and that's when things are kind of like, I don't know, joyful, or we're gonna create that kind of like calm mood, relaxed mood, or at least, more positive in nature. Then we start seeing this shift to things that are a little bit less positive. And I got to tell you, like, as I was reading the end of this, I'm like, I kind of want to know what this guy's relationship with his sister is like.
yep.
Because I want to know why he's counting memories with his sister like he's counting logs on his jog. That's what I want to know.
I thought it was interesting that you bring that up, Tim, because I had a lot of students that had some very lively discussion about how he felt about his sister. And I told them I think there's a range of acceptable answers, like the same way your relationship with your own sibling is not, all one way or another. I think that there's going to be a lot of opportunity for interpretation here that's going to be
Yeah.
supported in the text. And I'm like really excited for the readers this summer who get to enjoy this.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, that actually brings me up to my question that I have for you all, and then I'll answer mine. But what is his relationship with his sister, do you think, after we're kind of looking at how he's considering what's going on? I'm particularly focusing on the image of the butterfly as I try to develop my understanding. But what do you think, Britton? Like, as we go through this, he brings up the sister. It seems borderline almost nowhere, although, like I said, for me, I'm watching him count physical things so that he can then start considering the mental kind of ticks that he's taking in terms of his memories. But what are you thinking?
Well, I mean, I need to step back even further from your question, if you don't mind, because
Oh, yeah.
something I probably spent too much time thinking about, as one does when they see things that grab their attention, was how the part about him dreaming about her,
Yeah.
and it said who called last night when I was sleeping. And it says, yeah, exactly right there. And I think it's easy to overlook this. And then he thinks back to this memory that he gave of her. And I'm like, okay, so this is confusing to me. Like, he dreamt of her. She called while he was sleeping. Is this one of these things like she woke him up? You don't know. It's like, did she wake him up and then he fell back asleep? Or
And I
did
love
he
that. I
just
love how you thought about that.
supernaturally know? Or, yeah, go ahead, Tim.
Well, I was going to say, I don't think that she actually called. I actually interpreted that as him dreaming, and she showed up in his dream, and he can't get it out of his mind.
And that's where I am. Like, I wonder if she, this isn't like one of those things where kids say, oh, it's like this time on South Park. No. Or, I'm like, no, I really wonder, did she call? Did this thing about the butterfly even happen? Because it sounds like he introduces it as a dream.
Yeah.
And so I think that's interesting, because if we think of it as a dream, like, is he idealizing her? And, the conflict for me is always ideal versus real.
Well,
What's the ideal? What's the reality of it? Go ahead, Claire.
Oh, well, I was just going to add on to what you're saying here, because for me, I kind of like blocked that section off when I read it the first time, and I said that it's like not solid. and it's like delicate and
Mm-hmm.
brief. And I thought that goes back to me to these clouds that are like thin memories, sort of like stretched. It's kind of
It's your
sheer.
favorite word, Claire. It's ephemeral.
And there we go. And it's
There you
called the
go.
fallibility of memory. This poem reminded me a lot of the myth of music, and I would probably pair
Mm.
them together
Hmm.
because I can see a lot of like interesting connections there.
Yep.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
really appreciate this line that actually kind of works with that, right? What it was she said is immaterial. There is the gesture though, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what he's counting, and it's funny though because this guy is on the jog, and I'm just thinking about how the jogging relates to what's going on in his mind. And sure enough, right? The gesture is the jog, right? And
Yep.
I'm just looking at this and I'm like, wow, okay, right? What she said was immaterial. It wasn't what she said during this whole process. It was the fact that she was willing to do something here, right? But you're right. For me, it was delicate. There's a delicate something going on, particularly because I was thinking about the butterfly, right? The butterfly that was trying to spread its wings. The butterfly,
Mhm.
and I'm like, okay, there's something really delicate here as he reflects on his sister and their
Yeah.
relationship. And it might be that she actually called, but like I said, for me, I interpreted that as she kind of showed up in his dream. And as odd as this sounds, it reminds me of that episode of SpongeBob when he was visiting everybody's dreams. That's what I actually thought about.
No, I totally dig it. Totally dig it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's something with the line, and you just happen to have it here. So, which is interesting enough because even though we have three sentences, we actually have four independent clauses, right? Because we have the line 29, we've got the semicolon.
Hmm.
But this quick flute darkness of a sister's voice
Yeah.
that a brother hears in his heart. Um, and I think there's going to be kids who jump into interpretations of this about what you said about the butterfly wing, the butterfly, and how it being delicate. Um, I'm sure kids are going to talk in their essays about somebody's going to say, "Oh, butterflies, if you touch their wings, they can't fly." I don't know if that's true, but I've always heard that as an old wives'
Yeah.
tale. And so I'm sure they're going to talk about that. I'm sure there's going to be kids who talk about how his sister's not really alive, or his sister's dead, or maybe he doesn't even have a sister. It's all part of his dream. Either
Mhm.
way, but I'm just seeing a lot of this. What you all are saying, this uncertainty, this delicateness. I'm trying not to say delicacy because we're not eating much right now, but this delicateness of it. And so, if I come back to that complexity, I come back to that idea of for every yin there's a yang, and I think about the words I talked about earlier that introduce some struggle or some pain to it. I'm seeing some fleeting beauty. The flowers are fleeting. The
Mhm.
butterfly is fleeting. It'll fly away. It will spread its wings. This dream will end. And contrasted with this pain that he is experiencing either on the jog or as a result of the reflection. I'm just not sure.
Well, and the final lines to me, I think there's room for interpretation that he goes on these runs to be connected to his sister
Yeah,
if he's
nice.
breathing deeply enough. And so while it is painful, like while it causes discomfort, it is still beautiful, just like the butterfly is dark but has these yellow flecks,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, like I had a lot of I don't know, I just felt like because when you're in, and if people who do run know this, the way that you can sort of connect to this deeper part of your mind. And it seems like initially he's maybe trying not to think of anything, right? He's kind of looking at,
Yeah.
oh, there's a lamppost, like there's a bird, there's a mailbox, keep going, don't walk, don't stop.
And
But
there's my
then
sister. Yeah.
there's my sister, I think of, and if my heart's beating deeply enough, I can hear her voice again.
Yeah. And I think that this is where, the interpretation, how kids interpreted it differently, is really going to shine through because we don't actually know what his relationship with his sister is. And I think that a lot of times, like even just looking at this, right, there's the quick flute darkness of the sister's voice. Well, I love the flute part because I really thought that this was a positive experience as he jogged in the morning. And then I see that it's the darkness of his sister's voice. And I'm like, wait a second, what the heck? And then all of a sudden I have the brother will hear in his heart when he's breathing deep enough, right? And he's like, oh, so he's reflecting on his sister and their relationship, which he has to have a somewhat positive experience with, particularly because he thinks about the gesture and not what she said. But we have the birds are flying overhead past the disk of the sun, but then all of a sudden there's a flaring shadow that's fanned down from above. And so we have to really recognize here that there is some sort of tension with his sister, but it's not necessarily not a fond reflection. But it's also it's not a reflection that's, he's like, I can't wait to have this again. And that just goes back to this conflicted kind of element. And that's why I thought about that butterfly. If that really happened, if that moment really happened, the black winged butterfly with the yellow speckles on its wings, that's where you see the contrasting images of the positive and the negative there. And if I were writing about this with my kids, I would say, the author does A, B, and C in order to highlight, and I would bring up the painful yet consistent and comforting memories of his sister. I think that's what I would put. I would put painful and consistent together as I tried to write about this.
One thing I'm really excited to do with my kids with this prompt is like the metaphor triangles, and the idea of this like extended metaphor, right, where you have like item one that's literally stated in the text, what it figuratively represents, and then at the top of the triangle, like what do those things have in common? What do those two elements have in common? And so I think once you have students kind of unpack for themselves, like, and again, a range of interpretation, what does jogging represent in relationship to his sister? Then you can sort of break down, okay, well, what are the clouds, sort of, what's the comparison there? Or like, what is the difficulty of him jogging? What is the butterfly? And kind of looking at how all those pieces add up to a whole.
All right. I'm going to put you all on the spot before we shift to our next one here. And this is what I'm going to ask, right? So when we talk about complexity, we're going to talk about at least one contrast or one set of layers. I'm going to ask. So we need to think about the complex reflection that he has while jogging. I would like you to give me your blank yet blank. Okay? So in order to highlight that the speaker's reflections are blank yet blank, Brandon, can I get your, on the spot, blank yet blank? Or blank and blank, although I'm thinking that this is a better for a yet poem, but what would you put for your layers there?
Comforting, yet. I'm going to go ahead and try to do the yet. Comforting, yet painfully fleeting.
Okay, there we go. Oh, and that's great because of the kind of like lack of material with the dream, with the clouds. Oh, that's great. Claire, what about you?
The ephemeral. Okay. I mean, Claire hit the nail on the head with the ephemeral.
Look, we can't use a word in the poem, or that just shows that we're literate. That's what I think.
That's true.
That's great. You're literate. You need an adjective.
That's great advice.
I wonder if it could be like haunting, yet like yearning, like that he's like simultaneously haunted by the memories of his sister, yet yearning for a connection with her.
Love it. Perfect. Yeah. Good. And a bunch of kids are going to watch.
Thinking about the thesis that would be, with Claire's, although he is haunted by, although the speaker is haunted by this, he still yearns for,
a connection with his sibling. Yeah.
And maybe a dependent clause in there that kind of references the setting, like, although the morning setting is like beautiful, or that he's sort of immersed in this. I saw it initially as this, like you said, Tim, like really beautiful rebirth moment. And then I kept reading him going, ooh, okay.
I know. Right. Well, think about this, right? We could have, the speaker contrasts the beautiful morning jog with the dark memories and dreams of his sister in order to highlight that although, and maybe we want to put the word haunting after the word although, and then finish it off like that. That'd be a great way to do it, because then you could just easily write through that. How do we see this kind of positive imagery consistently contrasted with the negative as he goes throughout his jog? Absolutely.
And I'll add, as people think about this and think about how to get the kids thinking this way, is, what we're talking around right now is, I know it's more complex than this, what we've talked about, but a way to, at the base level, we're talking about how the speaker idealizes something versus the reality.
Yes.
And so, now, again, I know it's more complex, but just getting kids to start thinking, hey, there's going to be an ideal, there's going to be a reality, and start looking at those things and then build from there.
And actually, in terms of a way to do this in class, right? If you look at the way that the poem unfolds, you kind of get to see that, because you see the ideal of setting out for the jog. Then you see the reality of having to actually measure and start to wheeze and deal with the struggle. And then you see you see the ideal here of the dream, and then the reality of kind of dealing with that kind of haunting yet yearning at the very end.
And the inability to really remember too, that
right.
like.
Yep.
Yeah,
Love it.
It reminds me of a Death Cab lyric that that says it like something like, it's sad that our memories depend on the faulty cameras in our mind. And I'm just like, oh my word, that's true. All right, let's look at the second one here. We're not going to read the full excerpt because we just don't have time for that.
I'm going to time us on this one because we want to make sure we have at least a few minutes to talk about question 3.
Oh, for sure.
I'm going to be the bad guy on this one.
That's not a problem, but we don't have to read this. We're going to assume that people read the chocolate cake piece, okay? I'll give it a quick summary after we read the prompt and just talk about addressing the prompt. Claire, you get to talk first when we talk about addressing the prompt as well. Here we go. The following excerpt is from Amy Bender's novel, The Particular Sadness of Lemon Cake, published in 2010. In this passage, the narrator, Rose, discovers that when she eats food, she has a unique ability to perceive the feelings of the person who prepared it. Read the passage carefully, then in a well-written essay, analyze how Bender uses literary elements and techniques to convey the narrator's complex experience of eating the chocolate lemon cake her mother has prepared for her. So essentially, and fill in any of the spots that I missed, but when I read this just 5 minutes ago, it seemed as though this particular narrator was eating a cake that was made by her mother for her birthday. And as she was eating the cake, she was like, oh, hey, I asked for this. And it's a really odd kind of concoction. And she recognizes that although she liked the taste of it, there was some sense of borderline emptiness in it. And then she reflects on her mother, who is consistently giving all that she can to the point of her own exhaustion. And then when her mom comes downstairs, she had eaten a whole piece. She had, presumably tried another bite of another piece. And then her mom asked if everything was fine. And her heart was a little bit heavy because I think that this is more of a maturation type of piece. And then she said, things are fine. And we all know what the word fine means when someone says things are fine. And then the piece kind of ends. What did I miss, Claire?
I think that also perhaps like the fact that the narrator is very confused. And that's in the prompt there, right? That it's sort of, she's discovering this. So like, I think that students have to bring in the idea that this is a young child. And that her experiences are very contradictory. Like she's like, no, don't get me wrong. The cake was delicious, but I could taste my mother's agony, right? And the weight my mother was carrying around with her. And so she keeps trying to take another bite, like what's happening to me? Like, I think it was also of what am I experiencing about my mom, but also like, why do I have this ability, these feelings, to the point where she does like collapse and she's like slumped on the floor, hot, sweaty, and the mom has to come kind of like help her up and check on her.
And I'm going to actually add a couple of things to that as well. I just want to make sure that in my synopsis I didn't miss anything huge. I forgot to mention that I forgot to mention that the narrator is super young, and I think that has a huge. I hate the adjective huge, so please just forgive me. But I think that has a significant impact on that complex experience, and at least I didn't say bigly. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. Now, Brandon, we're going to try to address this prompt. What in the prompt do I have to pick up on, and then Claire, come in right behind Brandon and say whatever Brandon misses that we got to pick up on, and then we'll talk about this a little bit.
Well, I mean, no one would ignore the title, and the idea that it's setting up a complexity on its own, like sadness of lemon cake. So hopefully students would grab onto that and immediately begin thinking that, okay, there's a sadness here. There's something negative that's going to come out of something that people usually think is positive. Like I just summarized the gist of what happens in the passage. Okay. But I also want to look at her name. Names matter. And in this case, what is a rose and what does a rose represent? And I would hope students would see that and start thinking, okay, immediately similar to what Claire talked about earlier with the metaphor triangles or the semiotic triangles, the idea that we've got this thing that could be seen metaphorically. What does it really mean, and what are our associations with it? And so we associate, beauty, but also pain. Well, boom, there you go. I mean, I just talked about the previous poem, and now I'm talking about this passage where we have this thing that is beautiful. She eats the whole slice. We see later on. But hopefully they're seeing that in the name. They can talk about that. That's something that could be part of their analysis. Not the only thing, but I mean, they could talk about that in their analysis. But looking at this is weird, the complex experience, but then the prompt doesn't just say complex experience. It's specific to the eating of the cake.
Yes.
And the mother. And I think that does it all, because in that huge paragraph that kind of belies the idea of a look for the big butt, because there's no way the shift is right there, but it is.
Yeah. Right.
And it continues to shift back and forth. The girl is torn. I'm not going to go any further because we're just talking about the prompt, but the girl is torn. And I'll talk more about that when we get into the passage itself.
Yeah.
Well, and Brandon, I want to add on to what you said. I tell my students, when you look at the task phrase, right, which is complex experience, and it's zooming you into eating that cake, but the word experience itself is an opportunity for analysis, for interpretation. Like when I ask my students, what's included in your experience? And then we start listing like all the things that are included in our experience. Like, okay, like College Board has really opened it up for you that you can say this, and we can all, sort of bring something to this conversation, because the idea of an experience, that could be your associations, your emotions, your physical reaction, your emotional reaction, your memories you associate with it. So I really like when they do that, because I think it gives students some room to play. And I think that's kind of what makes this a fun prompt here.
Yeah.
Right.
And I just love that it's a lemon chocolate cake, because I've never heard of that in my entire life ever.
I want to eat one.
And well, it's funny because I thought of it and I was like, that sounds disgusting, and I can't even consider it.
I better have it at the reading.
Right.
We must have it at the reading. Oh my gosh. I'll make sure I'll try to make sure.
Good. Okay, so let's actually start talking about this here, right? And one of the things that I really like to do is with my students is, especially if there's going to be like 3 or 4 paragraphs here, I like to be like, okay, let's try to figure out what we can see about the kid's experience with the chocolate cake at first, and then how things change, right? So we look at this first paragraph here, and it says that they looked through several cookbooks together to find just the right one. The smell in the kitchen was pleasant, and to be clear, the bite I ate was delicious. It was the warm. It was the citrus. So this right here is the perfect way to start if we're thinking about our thesis, when we think about the complexity, because how can we describe this particular moment and this particular experience? This particular experience is ideally delightful. And Brandon always talks about the ideal and the real, right? And it starts off with the idea of the ideal. It was picked together. I picked it out with mom. It was made. It was good. Right? And that's where I would hope that my kids would really start here in their first body paragraph, to be completely honest with you.
For me, sorry.
No, I say comments about the first paragraph.
I was just going to say, I think it's interesting that we already have this duality. I think this prompt really lends itself to that piece where you're putting 2 things on either side that are sort of fighting with the tension. The idea that we have chocolate and lemon, right? Hollow and whole, right? We have, distance and closeness. So we have a lot of things that are really juxtaposed, right next to each other, and that I think parallel her emotional experience while eating.
Right on. I mean, I love the line. That last sentence is just a beautiful juxtaposition, where we have the baked butter lightness enfolded by the deep, dark swirled sugar. I mean, come on. I mean, it probably creates a yin yang by the way it's folded together,
Yeah.
And so
and made all the
totally,
students hungry. Yeah.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
And they're like, right before lunch, what is this nonsense?
Yeah. But it's this lightness, this idea of something that's light something that is maybe escapist, but there's also this going to be some darkness swirled in with it. So there's depth to this.
I actually also love that the part here that says that it was built from scratch, because honestly, I'm thinking about this girl's relationship with her mother later on when I look at that line. I mean, I've read the whole piece, right? And the idea of, of it being built from scratch. This isn't some cookie cutter something, right? And, as I think about this little girl, like reflecting on trying to come to terms with the efforts that mom put in that seem exhausting to her, which might actually convey mom's love, but that's not necessarily something she fully understands. Because, it's not saying I love you, it's I have a headache, I gotta go lie down now, that kind of a thing. When I think about those kind of complexities, it's like, well, she's actually doing this for you, and you picked it out together, right? This is built from scratch. It's not some cookie cutter like, mom made a cake today, I got a cake on my birthday. Like, there's a lot that goes into this. And so I love that idea of the first element here, built from scratch. But we do have this big piece here where she kind of comes to this realization that there's something there, and that there's something missing, and there's something delicious, but there's something not right. And I'm going to let you both talk about this paragraph here before we get to the very end, because we've got 2 minutes to get through this, so we can quickly wrap up a question 3.
Well, I just have to say that I love the idea that she's feeling these things. It's darkening, but she keeps coming back to her mother being able, and that's the phrase she uses. My mother's able hands. Her mind had made the cake. Her mind had known how to balance the ingredients. Like, there's this recognition of her mother's ability and talent, and that her mother had done this for her, but she can't escape the feelings and this emptiness. And to come back to that bit in the last line from the first paragraph, when she has, and I want to say this real quickly, it was, maybe Claire can help me. It's like when she talks about the chocolate and lemon being empty. What's the line?
Hollow. Well,
oh yeah, hollow. There it is. Yeah, right. It's right after that. So much, none of it was a bad taste so much, but there was a kind of lack of wholeness to the flavors that made it taste hollow. It's like the lemon and chocolate were just surrounding a hollowness. And so, despite the fact that you had this contrast between the light and the depth, deep and dark, there's a hollow. There's like a nothingness there that almost adds a third layer of complexity. Go ahead, Claire.
Well, I think that too, like, we've all been talking, and maybe other people in the audience have felt this way, like Maycember, right? Like this, we're like working so hard as parents. And like, I saw a lot of this as a metaphor for motherhood. And it's like, it is difficult. It is challenging. It does take everything that you have. And like, obviously this mother maybe has extra things sort of going on she's navigating. And the young girl cannot understand how the love can exist simultaneously, like, but also the pain the mother is carrying. And that's because, quite frankly, our children are not meant to carry that.
Right.
Yeah. Our children are not meant to know that we are so exhausted, like that we don't know how we're going to make this cake from scratch, or we're going to get you to all these activities, or we're so depressed, but we're still going to get up out of bed and make you breakfast and get you to school. And so I think her confusion is because the mother is carrying something inside of her that is not for children.
Yeah.
Right. And so we have this little girl who's like, was it the bad lemon? Is it the sugar? But I love that she keeps coming back to, it's the best ever. It's delicious. It's yummy. Right. Because that's true of parenthood too. Right. It's wonderful. It's magical. It's excellent. But it's also, especially like in a time of difficulty, as this mother's like obviously going through, it can be overwhelming.
And that was a question I had coming out, Claire, the question I was going to add. And as I was reading, I thought about it, that she keeps coming back to how good it is, and as you say, so good, the best ever. But we talked about experiences earlier, like she's experiencing the flavor, but also these emotions. And so it's not just her commenting on it being the best ever and loving it because of the way it tastes. Like, there's also this emotional aspect that she has to it. And how are those things informing the way she feels about the cake? Is it tasting even, and we don't know, is it tasting even better because she recognizes the toil that her mother went through for the cake and for other things?
Yeah.
And
I ate
so,
desperate to prove myself wrong. That word
Yes, thank you.
stood
Yeah, you
out to
just
me.
took me to that line.
Yeah.
I love that that is the next line after that long
What a
paragraph.
great
Go ahead.
piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. Go ahead,
And
Tim.
I always tell my kids the shortest sentence in the piece is the most important. There you have it
Yeah,
right there. And
right on.
for me, as I'm thinking about the age of this child, I'm just thinking about how the child, as Claire said, right, can't understand this. Right? And
Right.
that's the real wrestle here, because I think the child is like, wait a second, so does my mom not love me because there's an emptiness here? And it's like, no. That emptiness is her exhaustion that put into this so you could have that because you built it from scratch together. But the thing for me is that if I were teaching this in my classroom, I would absolutely pair this with the We Were the Mulvaney's piece. And the
Yeah.
reason why is because this right here is when this particular narrator comes to terms with the fact that she's fine, but she's not fine because there's something that she's learning to understand that she didn't know before. And she doesn't quite know it. She still is in that naive moment, but she's a little bit less naive. Just like in the Mulvaney piece, he's like, I'm no idiot. I now know that everybody's going to die, but I had to pretend to not know what I knew, as if everybody else didn't know that, right? And so
Yeah.
you still see that little naivete here, and I think that would tie really well together with this here.
Hey, I got to be a jerk. We got 6 minutes till top of the hour.
Oh, I know, it's sad because I really want to. But this is good because this last prompt here, what we could really do is we could try to say what would be the piece that you would hope to read the essay from the most. Okay, so here we go. Last prompt. And folks, just so you know, we will have some other people coming in. Stephanie Kirk's going to come in, and Mario Miner's going to come in and join us for AP Lang, which we're going to deal with in just a couple minutes. But many works of literature depict a conflict between the old and the new. Old worlds, old ways, or old values clash with newer ones. Either from your own reading or from the following list, choose a work of fiction in which there is marked tension between the old and new. Then, in a well-written essay, analyze how the tension between the old and new contributes to an interpretation of the work as a whole. Claire, you get to begin here. The old, the new. What story are you hoping to read your essays for, and why?
I'm really excited. My students, I added Pride and Prejudice for the first time this year, and it was the best choice I've ever made. My students were so happy. They really enjoyed it. Even my country boys, they're listening to it while they're mowing yards and hunting on the deer stand.
That's amazing.
And so they were so excited to talk about the tension between the social expectations that Lizzie and Darcy both have to operate under, and Charlotte as well, and talk about sort of the necessity to sort of break with old traditions that are, no longer serving you, or that are, wrong for you individually. We talked a lot about rebels and social hierarchy. So I think students are really excited although I got nervous, because they're like listing all these characters and stuff. And then I looked up the prompt and I was like, okay. I thought it was like one character. And I'm like,
Yeah.
why are you talking about 6 different people? What are you doing?
Yeah,
Well, I put these people together, and then I put these people together. And I was like, you didn't want it. I'm excited for them.
Pride and Prejudice. That's what we want to read. Brandon, if you could read, you can read. And Claire, think about one backup book that you'd like to read about too. Brandon, give me your main book that you think that you would like to read essays about in relation to this prompt.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna start by saying I know I would read a lot of essays about Frankenstein.
Yeah.
As the kids, because Frankenstein is very often taught. It should be. It's still the most syllabized book on college introduction to literature syllabi, or syllabuses, whatever. But I know we're going to read a ton of Frankenstein, and we should, as we think about the creature
Yep.
as something new. Definitely the kids could and should make that argument. And then talking about Victor and his relationships and his connections to the family is something that is old, and that the creature and can't understand, and so on. But one book that I've really been encouraging people is Demon Copperhead, Barbara Kingsolver. If anybody's read it, I teach it in my college class, and I work with several teachers who are teaching it. The narrator, it's David Copperfield, but retold in Appalachia, modern day Appalachia, and it's the narrator is this boy, and he is very much the new, and he's growing, and we see him growing, but we see this tension between the way things used to be and how he's growing into things. I think absolutely that'd be an excellent book for that. But I also want to think about some plays and things too. And so I think there's several different plays you could do with this, like uh, My 12 Sons or A Raisin in the Sun. I think that would be a great one for this. And so, yeah, there's just so many texts that could work with this one. I think it's great. What about you, Tim? What do you think?
So my two, I'll give you the one that I would be most excited to read a paper about, and then my second most excited to read a paper about. Okay, and then Claire, we're going to let you bring in your last one to finish us off. I want to read papers about Brave New World. I think it's a softball, and I'm like, I love that book, and I could read papers about Brave New World all day, every day, honestly. And then my backup, the paper that I want to see is I want to see the kid write about the screw tape letters. And so for me, as Wormwood is listening to his letters from Uncle Screwtape, and he's actually fighting with how the protagonist has changed now that he's come to a faith, and he's trying to then interrupt his life with all of his old habits or the old ways of getting him to sin. I'm like, this could be one of the most fun papers ever. So those are my two: Brave New World and Screwtape Letters. And Claire, what's your backup? If you could read a paper about this, what would it be?
I think I would also like to see a student maybe with Clara and the Sun, because I think there's interesting ideas between like old and new, because like the new is not always better. I think that's maybe one of the examples where like the idea of trying to replace something that's like human or something that's part of our experience is flawed. And so I think that could be interesting as Clara sort of bridges both the old and the new. I think that could be really cool.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Claire. I love that book.
So good. I'm still thinking about her. Oh, Clara.
All right. Well, Claire, this is when. I mean, you could stay for our AP Lang prompts if you want, but I'm under the impression you don't teach AP Lang, so you're welcome to continue to join us if you'd like. But we've got Stephanie Kirk in here now. Stephanie, if you want to turn your camera on, and Claire, like I said, you can stay if you want and talk about Lang with us. That's not a problem.
I'm going to watch, but I'm going to sign off. Thank you guys for having me. It really was an honor. I had a great time talking with you guys. And again, thanks for this opportunity, and I can't wait to see what our students wrote.
Thanks, Claire.
All right.
Fantastic.
No, Claire, thank you very much. I have to resend the Zoom link to Mario, so you got to give me all just 1 second while we prepare for this. But while that's happening, Brandon, if you would just talk super quick about what's up on the screen, tell me when to change it, and I will change that. But if you could just give a little background about what that is, the workshops and whatnot. And Stephanie, we'll let you introduce yourself in just a minute.
Yeah, as you all see me walking through my house now that I
Sorry, Brandon.
No, you're fine. I don't care. Like I said, we do this super casual. I think I did the one a couple years ago at a brewery, so it's no big
You did,
deal.
yes.
So I want to welcome everyone if you're joining us. What you see on the screen here is the list of the Garden of English summer workshops that we're going to be offering. This will be predominantly me and Tim and Susan Barber, the wonderful Susan Barber, and we also have some special guests. Another one of those people is a guest right now. Stephanie's going to be. No. I'm sorry. It's Gina that's going to be there. I'm sorry. I had it totally wrong. But we'll also be joined by Jim Burke and Matt Johnson and possibly a couple of other people who will be our guests. And we keep the YouTube live free. We keep other YouTube videos on Garden of English that Tim's doing for free. Garden of English summer workshops help to cover some of that. And so, if you are able to support, we have a special coupon down here you can use when you sign up. Go ahead and check that out. And hey, it's not just advanced workshops for AP teachers. We also have a 3-day workshop that I'm leading in July for 6 through 12 ELA, where we tend to focus on literature one day, then we focus on rhetoric and argument and nonfiction another day. And then we have a day where we really focus on writing and working writing into the curriculum and addressing issues like AI and things like that so many people are working with.
All right.
And also, you see on the right hand side that Tim had some details.
Oh, sorry.
For that. That's fine. Tim has some details for that. And you can email Tim at gardenofenglish.tim@gmail.com. And go ahead, Tim.
All right, and then we'll shift over to there. And I'm trying to get Mario's email. I don't have his email address because I'm a jerk. I don't even know how I missed this here.
Mario's not your friend, is he, Tim? You don't even know Mario.
That's absurd.
You're just throwing his name around to sound cool.
I know.
Yeah. Then the other thing here is Tim has agreed to share these. Every summer I run a book club, and we have AP English literature and AP English language teachers. And we have a lot of people who join who aren't teaching either one of those courses. But this year's book for language for the nonfiction book is a memoir called Bibliophobia that is so striking. I've never read anything like it, where this academic is writing about her experiences with books and how they could be traumatic, and really makes me as a teacher reflect on, what I might have done by making some kids read certain books, and how that could affect their lives. And so it's an excellent text. I'm rereading it right now and being reminded of how great it actually is. And then the literature book is it's a novel in verse, and just a beautiful novel in verse, and it's called Adnan. And you can check out the QR code down there. There's Mario. He's joining up now.
Yes.
You can check out the QR code there on the screen for that. And then next Wednesday, we're having a post-exam celebration. Hey, Mario, we made it work.
Hello.
But next Wednesday, we're having a post-exam celebration, 7 p.m. Eastern time. And this is just a time to come together and celebrate you and the great work that you all have done. This is AP Lang and AP Lit teachers. I love and will ask people to tell the stories of the kids this year who came in, couldn't write a paragraph, but that one day in May they sat down, and they're probably going to get a 2, but it's going to be a gold medal around their neck because they worked their tail off and they really learned something. So it's a time to celebrate you, and it's time to celebrate the kids that really kicked butt this year. We do some book giveaways. We give away some class sets of novels. You can come check that out too. That is on the YouTube chat, and I'll make sure the link for that is, and I'll make sure to repost it before we end here. But
Awesome.
Tim, I'm going to hand it back over to you, and welcome Mario and Stephanie.
Yes, Brandon, I appreciate your willingness to actually take care of that for me while I was trying to find Mario's email. Mario, I am trash, man. I thought that I emailed you earlier today, so just forgive me. That's all I ask. Here's what's up, folks. We're going to let Stephanie and Mario introduce themselves in just a minute. I'm Timm Freitas. This is Gandalf with me right here. This is Dr. Brandon Abden. We've been doing this for a few years now, talking about released prompts. I want to just point out that we cannot talk about any prompt that is not released by the College Board, because that is not... we're not eligible to use that. If anybody even puts information about that in the chat, that could actually be problematic, so I have to delete all that information. So just know we can only talk about the released prompt. So that's like the napping prompt and things like that. So we'll check those out together. But before we do, Mario, I'm going to ask that you introduce yourself. Tell us where you work. Tell us where you're from. The second Mario's done, Stephanie, if you chime in, that would be excellent.
I'm Mario Miner. I teach at Osborne High School in Marietta, Georgia, and I'm originally from Detroit, Hamtramck, Michigan. I'm happy to be here to share all this with you all tonight.
All right, Stephanie, you got to unmute, though, because you're on mute. And I would encourage you not to mute very much, because we're having a conversation and having a good time, and so we'll forget to unmute, and then we'll be like, what? So take it away, Stephanie.
I got you. I am Stephanie Kirk. I am at Heritage High School in Maryville, Tennessee. That's our brick and mortar school. And then I run a virtual program for the state of Tennessee called AP Access for All through the Niswanger Foundation.
Okay, and can you tell us a little bit more about that? What does that actually do, that foundation?
Yeah, absolutely. So we essentially offer AP programming to students in schools where, for whatever reason, the student can't take it in the school. So perhaps the school's just too small. They don't offer that cohort, or maybe the schedule doesn't quite fit. Like, for example, they're an athlete or a musician and it doesn't fit into their block during the day. So we do the virtual programming for them at night.
Gotcha. Awesome.
Everywhere.
Now I know. And Mario, how long have you been in Georgia, teaching in Georgia?
This is my 20th year, man.
Wow. All right. There
years.
we go. All right. Well, it's nice to have you both. Folks, a couple things that Mario and Stephanie did not tell you is that they are also heavily involved in the reading as well. So they have to dissect these prompts, and they have to work with these prompts and really, try to help us as readers as we look for what we're trying to reward kids for on test day. So please note that we're going to go over these prompts now. I'm going to share my screen up. We'll be able to look at these. And Mario, I put a comment in the chat and I just totally spelled the word email wrong. I hope you judge that harshly as well.
I did not even see it. No worries.
Well, anyway, nonetheless, now that I have your email, we're going to be all set. I'm going to pull these prompts up here. And what's going to happen is this. I'm going to read the prompt, and then I'm going to ask you all to just tell me, how do you help your kids address this? Now, what we're not going to do right now is we're not going to actually read every source and things like that, because we're just trying to say, all right, we get these prompts. What are the things that we have to do? What are the things that we can look for? What can I do in my classroom that can really help get kids to do what they need to do on exam day. Okay, so here we go. And you can also, this is unfiltered. Besides the fact I asked that you don't use profanities. If you were like, I hate this prompt, well then tell us. It's okay. All right. If you love it, tell us you love it. But here we go. Napping, or getting brief intervals of sleep during the day, is practiced by many people who are unable to get the recommended number of hours of sleep per night. In some countries, stores and restaurants customarily close during midday hours to allow citizens to take a nap. Some argue that napping may encourage productivity and provides health benefits. However, others argue that naps might actually limit productivity or leave individuals still feeling sleep deprived. Carefully read the following 6 sources, including the introductory information for each source. Write an essay that synthesizes material from at least 3 of the sources and develops your position on the value, if any, of napping. So, Stephanie, I'm going to actually start with you because Brandon and I have already been talking for an hour. And then Mario will go to you, and then we'll go to Brandon. And then if there's anything I need to sweep up, I will. But there'll probably be nothing, and that's okay. I'll let you talk. Stephanie, your kids get this prompt on exam day. What do you hope that they know to bring to the table with just the prompt before they start digging into the sources themselves?
The biggest thing that I think here is that I want the students to recognize that it's an argument. So I have them go through, and I actually tell them to look down there at that sentence, write the essay that synthesizes a material from at least 3 of the sources and develops your position on the value, if any, of napping. And we really look at that wording there, the value, if any. And immediately I want them to think about times where it is valuable and times where it is not valuable. So when they're going through and they're reading that previous paragraph, they're already starting to look for, how can I qualify this? And what methods of development are going to help me? And that's like first line of defense, is going through those things.
Mario, what about you when you get in this prompt? Your kids are there. What are you hoping that they're grabbing?
So, like Stephanie said, first, during some APSIs and just some workshops, people were wondering whether or not the prompt would be a values prompt again. So I'm
Yeah.
glad that we got that, because there was a lot of work on value prompts. Also, I think the focus for me is making sure my students understand the task. It's productivity versus health benefits, right? So are you looking at that? Because once you start going through the sources, you can easily become distracted, right? Like, even reading through it, the prompt places napping almost as a cultural issue before we even get into the
Yeah.
sources. And I think students will read that and then be so excited that it seems accessible because everyone wants to take a nap.
Yeah.
So now I feel like I have so much to say, and I can get away from making sure I do what the prompt is asking me to do.
Yeah, and I really appreciated the kind of versus setup that you just kind of made there, right? Is it this versus this? And that actually is going to help with something I have to say a little bit later. But Brandon, what about you?
Well, I mean, really coming out of the previous conversation that we had in the previous hour with Lit, I'm like Mario. I'm always asking students to look for the tension, or what's at conflict here. Not to say that they have to choose one of the sides, but that way they can talk about multiple sides, or a third side, whatever, not to force a binary, if they decide to kind of qualify it, like Stephanie was talking about. That way, when they're reading the sources, they can start thinking about where the sources lie on this spectrum. And so that's one of the things I really push the kids, is what are they giving us in the prompt? And again, I come back to, not always it works. Not always does it work, but it usually does, is the idea of what's the ideal versus the real here from someone's argument. So ideally, it would be great if we could all nap.
Yeah.
However, in reality, it affects productivity and we don't get things done.
You know-
So getting students just to think about those things and the relationship of them in an argument when they're stepping into this kind of conversation. Also, I want to say, if the synthesis readers don't have on their bingo card this year something about students arguing, or how many students are going to mention the need for having a nap time at school, then they're missing an opportunity, because the kids are going to, how many kids are going to mention that this year? Come on.
Well, I think, unfortunately, my AP Lang class was the first block this year, because by the time I teach third block and fourth block, right, I'm always exhausted. So I kid you not, almost every day I start with, you know what today would be a great day for? And my students always say, a nap. And I say, you're right. But unfortunately, we can't because we have work to do. And I would have loved if my AP Lang kids had that experience all year with me, because my
They would be
freshmen could tell
quoting
you.
you. They would be quoting you in the
I
essay,
know,
Tim.
I know. And so when I saw this, I was like, oh, if only I had them third block or fourth block, but obviously I didn't.
Right. Yep.
Now, one thing that I also typically do with my kids when they get the prompt, just real quick, is I always tell them that I want them to kind of look for ideas that show up in this first part, or language that relates to ideas. So when we have the definition of napping, brief intervals of sleep during the day is practiced by many people who are unable to get the recommended numbers of hours of sleep per night. It says unable to. Now, I understand that there are some reasons why people are unable to get the recommended hours, but I would suggest that on the whole, it's not necessarily unable to, it's undisciplined to. And so I would want my kids to actually say, okay, recognizing that there are times when you have to do things. I get it. But how many people are doom scrolling? How many people are Netflixing? How many people are doing just a little bit more than they probably should because of a little bit of a lack of discipline based on what entertainment does? And so I would want my kids to start thinking about the nature of discipline first, just so that they could start getting some ideas. And then, Mario, as you brought the idea of culture. But then we talk about restaurants closing, and that brings up economics. And that also brings up opportunity. And now we have these kind of bigger ideas coming out, it's like I want them thinking about these bigger ideas, because then that can help us with the value. Sure, it might be valuable for my own personal sleep, but is it valuable for the guy who owns the restaurant that shuts down in the middle of the day during lunchtime? Because that's what people actually eat, things like that. So I would want kids to kind of look there.
And now that you say that, Tim, I wonder how students will respond to that, especially American students who are now used to a post-COVID world where things used to actually be open really late. I think one of the sources mentioned how everything opens back up until 9 versus now where everything is shut down at about 11:30.
Yeah.
Most restaurants are closed early, and there are a number of students that don't even remember what life was like pre-COVID. So that is a very, very interesting point about how it impacts economics and how it would have impacted economics before.
Absolutely.
Yeah, source C goes deep into that, Mario.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was really interesting. I think a lot of kids are going to end up talking about that source because of that, because of how deep it goes into it. I didn't expect one of the sources to get that deep into the specifics of things opening and closing like that.
Now, Stephanie, I'm going to bring up source A here real quick. Now, we're not going to read all of source A. If there's something you want to comment on, or for anybody, if you read source A and you want to comment on something, that's fine. But I want to really look at the source information, because I think that this is a place where teachers often overlook really strong opportunities to teach their kids about how to choose sources on their AP exam. Now, someone in the prompt actually also put in the chat here, right, that the prompt was well loved, but she wasn't impressed with the sources. And that's because the kids could actually, pull some information out of these sources without reading them in full and actually getting to the kind of complexity of the issue. And to me, that's my concern when these sources are so long. And I think about the very first synthesis papers from 2007 through 2011. The source material was never a lot. It was 2 paragraphs max, right? And now, since about 2013, they've best been sometimes they go on to a second page. Sometimes they do these things. And I think that can kind of hinder kids reading something for a full argument there. But that doesn't mean that I don't think you can't really access a lot of kind of good information to see if you want to engage with the prompt just by looking at the particular source material. So, Stephanie, is there something that you have your kids look at in relation to source material? I have source A up here right now that can kind of help them and direct them before they even have to dig in and read more critically.
Absolutely. So I have them actually start with the source listing on the very front with the prompt and kind of go through and see where those are going to help them. And we always use whatever chart or graph is there and then the visual image that goes with it. But when we're looking at the source information, like you said, I think you're right. When we go through, I always have my students to note the date, because you guys mentioned the duality of things. I want them to look at the time frame too. And so I have them note the date of the article and then some of the stuff that's mentioned inside of it. But this one being from CNN, I want them to think about credibility, because in their commentary, whatever evidence they pull from here, I want them to be able to talk about the importance or why it matters or how it lends. And you guys focused on the economic aspect. This one is from CNN Health. And so we saw it from when my students and I debriefed it just briefly. We talked about like looking at it through the health lens or the medical lens, which is language, honestly, that we borrowed from AP Seminar, and focusing on what does this say about the health lens. And then when we're reading it, we do like little pluses and minuses in terms of where do we see that value, where does it seem to have some benefit. And this one, I thought it was a nice source because it brings in this idea of like habitual napping and how that kind of impacts. And so that lets you think not just like an occasional nap, but habitual napping. And then you start to see like napping because we don't get enough sleep at night versus napping with that sleep at night. So we could see how those parts pull together.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm going to interject here too, because Stephanie, the habitual bit is the part that caught me about this. You know, it mentions it, and then it talks about, I think the line that I liked was, meanwhile, previous research has shown that frequent napping or regularly napping for extended periods during the day may be a sign of early dementia in older adults. And so I saw that comparing the habitual part to the frequent napping or regularly napping for extended periods, and it helped them kind of qualify this. Say it needs to be short, it needs to be part of what you do, it needs to be a habit, not just something you said, oh yeah, I need a nap today. And I'm hoping some of the kids, if they really use this source in a smart way, that they'll be able to talk about that.
Mario, anything to say about source A, or particularly the source information, or how you're going to address that with your kids as they try to start thinking about if they're going to use this particular source or not?
One of the things I always do, and I know Christy, our friend Christy, does it, is looking for the shifts and how this shifts quickly between almost the both sides. Like you said, Brandon, how students are able to qualify based on this information. And if you use it, you can have this back and forth conversation. And we always talk about at the reading sources being in conversation with each other. I love how this source is in conversation with itself. It doesn't say, hey, I am definitely saying this. And I would warn my students against just choosing this, as we said earlier, haphazardly, just saying, oh, I can cherry pick something out of here to use, because it may not work out for you that way. So you would have to read it carefully to make sure you chose exactly what you needed from this source. But I did love that it gave students a great bit of information on both sides.
And you know what I think about, right, is I think about, you know, if I'm trying to teach kids how to get the sophistication point, I'm going to use source A in my classroom to show them how to do that in a paragraph. And the reason why is because when it goes into the shift to the like the overnapping, which can actually kind of suggest elements of dementia and whatnot, as if my kids are making the case that it's a healthy thing to do, so napping is healthy and it can lead to a lower dementia risk and whatnot, right? When they provide their commentary for me explaining how it actually is more valuable because it can create, you know, healthier individuals, which can create healthier communities, I'm going to show them how to use some of this bottom text as a qualifier in their commentary, not in their topic sentence, not even as their evidence, but in their commentary, right? Especially as they kind of finish up their paragraph, they could say, not to suggest that this needs to be overdone, because if this is overdone in this particular type of a way, then it could actually have detrimental effects. So with health as the focus, make sure that this is the kind of case. But if this is the case, then napping can be incredibly valuable. That right there can really, really help kids understand, how do I provide quotes in my commentary, not as evidence, but as ways to kind of synthesize with my own thinking. How can I also deal with the complexity of the issue? So source A can kind of really help us here. I also appreciate that it is about the health. What's up, Mario?
And before we go, the other thing that stood out to me was how often this source says could. Like, it could. And I think what I would get my students to pay attention to, again, when we're cherry picking sources, trying to skim through, if you use something that could be, your argument is already weakened. So
Yeah.
you want to make sure you have something, like you said, maybe you use it as your commentary versus trying to use it as strong evidence because it won't necessarily support your position.
Yeah. And I do think that this is one of those kind of sources that I can totally understand with the I love this prompt, but I wasn't impressed with the sources because as kids are trying to fly through this, they find that one line, boom, could cause dementia, could not cause dementia, boom, and then move on. And all I know is that I've been on synthesis for so many of these last few years. If I get stuck on it again, I'm gonna be snoozing in no time. So that's that. So I do appreciate that the source information does give us one of those things though that to think about the value in relation to health. Let's look at source B here, right? We have constant summer. Who's napping, how long, and what does it mean for our health? Well, this is great because once I see source B, if I'm a kid trying to fly through thinking about what's the value, what sources should I read, when source A and source B are both about health, I'm going to encourage my kids. You can kind of know you can write a health argument here, folks. Okay? So figure out how you feel about napping in relation to health and then try to write that particular argument. But anything about source B that either of you all would like to talk about? Because there is one other thing that I want to bring up as well. But I want to hear what you all have to say first.
We always look straight at the charts or the graphs, and on this
All right,
one,
I'll scroll down.
what I thought was interesting here is going to be you've got the words with that information. So when our students are looking at it, I want them to pick up on not just the data, but like that the stage of sleep impacts the feeling they have when they are awake. And so I felt like that gives a good avenue to address some of the realistically some of the tension that we have to address with it. So it mentions that 20 to 30 minutes is probably the sweet spot. But then that
Probably.
yeah,
it could be the sweet spot.
yeah, but it directly aligns over there with source E as well. So there was a very clear connection with those two parts as well. But I think it gives some commentary to be able to say, hey, it's not just about how much sleep you get, but it's the phases of sleep that you're in when you wake up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked wow, the image or the graphic is really, really nice. I think kids are gonna be like, yes, it makes you groggy. I do like how you said, Stephanie, it connects with so many of the other sources. It's in conversation with source E, it's in conversation with source D, where it talks about us, and it's still source A, where we cannot sleep too much because I don't, pardon me, I like a good 2-hour nap.
Oh, me too. Me too.
So maybe I'm violating the the rules for brain health, but I think students will read that, and if they again don't read it carefully, they'll just go groggy without understanding and trying to have that conversation fully.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that I actually appreciate about this particular source that I want to teach in my classroom before exam day is that the first source was from CNN Health, right? And I always tell my kids CNN does lean liberal, but we're not talking about politics here, so that doesn't necessarily matter, right? We do want to recognize it is a news source. They do have journalists. Like, this isn't just a blog, right? But if we look at this one, this is actually from the Sleep Foundation, and so it's really important for me where we look at the kind of information and I'm like, look at what's the difference between the Sleep Foundation and CNN. CNN is remarkably versatile with what they're trying to produce on their website, whether it's health or not, or news or whatever. I'm like, but the Sleep Foundation, guess what they focus on? They focus on sleep, right? Sleep. And although I absolutely adore my Sony camera, in fact, I think I only buy Sony cameras now. I have a Canon, and I have to admit the benefit of buying a Canon every once in a while is that Canon is only focused on photography and video. Sony is incredibly versatile. So, of course, the colors on my Canon are significantly better. I can get a better product in post from my Sony. But my point is when I talk about this with kids, is I'm like, we want to really think about what these organizations do, and then we want to think about why we would choose one of these sources over the other. So I always ask my kids, if I were to do this, I would say, you could only pick one of these two sources to talk about health. Which one are you going to choose and why? And I'd want them to justify that as they think about the sources. Yeah.
I think that's especially important. You say you don't want to make it about politics. And so this is not meant to be a political statement. As everybody gets scared, like, what's he going to say?
Oh, I don't care.
So, when we do have sources like this, the Sleep Foundation, like, politics. Who's politically against or sleep, right? Whatever. But
Right.
um, but if in other sources, when kids see this foundation, they're like, well, who cares about that? What do we know about the people who really care about that, and how might they tend to lead? And so we can begin to hopefully start identifying a bias
Yeah.
in a way.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's so important to look at this and say, yeah, the Sleep Foundation, they're going to be experts on this. And then the further conversation is, well, if they did say something in here about economics, maybe it was the the productivity Sleep and Productivity Foundation. Well, now I'm leaning somewhere, right? And
Yeah.
so I'm glad to have these discussions where kids are thinking, oh, Sleep Foundation, they focus on this because sometimes we get like the Americans for Prosperity. Like,
Yeah.
but let's talk about that. What does that really mean when we say that they're for prosperity? Like, what are they for
Yeah.
here?
Now, I'm going to just interject one thing here, though, right? And I do think that this is where we want to teach kids. I actually think this is a great graph. Like, I'm looking at this comment in the chat that says, I love the prompt, but I'm not impressed with the sources. And I really think that these sources are really teachable so that they can become a great way to help kids manage sources that are like this, right? Because one of the problems that I'm going to have with my students on a quick test day as they're trying to interpret this, so I'm going to bring this in my classroom and we're going to look at how to read visuals and whatnot, is when you add 52.6 to 49.1 to 38.5 to 35.3 to 25.2, we are well above 100%. And so what this really means is that the survey was multiple questions and someone could feel groggy and tired at the same time, and that could have been counted in both of those lines. And someone could have been refreshed and well rested and satisfied, and that one person could have been accounted for in all three of those lines. We don't actually know what the survey looked like. And
Or
so
the
because
person
of
who works at the Sleep Foundation didn't get a nap that day,
that's
and they
right.
didn't
That's
they
right.
didn't go back and double check their figures.
And so right, and so now this is kind of like last year on the GPS one where it said that people use GPSs 95% of the time with their phone, and kids were like, it's used the most, right? And I'm like, no, the GPS is actually on while you're walking around in the background. That's why it's on 95% of the time. And so it's really, this is one of those sources where I'm trying to help kids realize we can't just be like, well, 52% felt groggy, but 49 felt refreshed. And so because that's almost 50-50, we're good. It's like, wait a second, hold on. You just can't look at the data like that. But I anticipate that we're going to see some kind of incorrect data reading. And so this is a really good chart to help teach kids the specifics of reading like that. Now, it's 5:31, and I do want to get to talk about the other prompts, but I want to look at the particularly, and we can go to any other prompt that any of you want to talk about, by the way, but I want to look particularly at the visual that was provided, like the straight visual, because this is something here, folks. So this right here is, I don't know why it's not zooming up for me. This is sad. What's going on? Oh my gosh. It won't just work. There we go. Source F, okay? An employee sleeps in the nap room at Thrive Global, Ariana Huffington's wellness website. I wish that I worked at Thrive Global. If Mario, I think you might join me here, right?
Yes, sir.
I would even share a nap pod with you. It wouldn't bother me at all. All right? But here we go. This is a person in a sleep pod in an office. And what the heck are you guys trying to help your kids do with this? Stephanie, we're going to start with you. Like, your kids get this photo, and it's like, what the heck are we going to do with this?
So we actually kind of talked about this briefly. We have done some college tours, and there are some sleep pods at a school in our area. And so some of the students were like, yeah, I looked at that picture and I was like able to talk about how I felt like I could address the need to have like a quick sleep in a sleep pod, but then how this pod is conducive to creating that sleep environment. So I think it's an interesting kind of reach there. But another thing that I thought was nice is the way that this talks to Source E. Source E mentions Nike and Google having the sleep pods there, which comes back to what we mentioned earlier. Mario pointed out, like the concept of wellness. How do we fit this in? And so now we can see it on a broader, I guess, context, if you will, when we're putting this together with the others.
Ooh, and I'm going to chime in just super quick. if we think about wellness like that and we tie it to Google and Nike and this particular company, think about as we think about sophistication, connecting that to the idea of employers caring about the wellness of their employees as opposed to just being the cog in the corporate machine, which is, we have these two narratives consistently, right? Oh, I'm just a cog in the corporate machine. Oh, care about me more, corporate overlords or whatever, right? And so that could really help with a sophisticated conversation to kind of bring this in. Let's talk about personal wellness with napping, and then let's talk about social wellness because it's going to lead to economic wellness when people feel cared for. And you could really open that up into something remarkably sophisticated. I agree.
An analogy for it, and I'm sure some kids will talk about this, is the opportunity that the way we've changed in just the past 15, 20 years to where workplaces allow women to nurse, to bring
Yeah.
children, or even allow women to have rooms where they could go and pump if they're nursing. And so I'm sure there are kids who would be able to talk about those sorts of things, not being parents themselves, but being aware of that being something that has shifted in their lifetime, really.
Yeah.
And you all kind of stole my thunder because
I'm sorry, Mario.
It's okay. I mean, great minds. So I had how it connects to source E, and I said, I loved how source E, it said sleep has an image problem, right?
Yeah.
But sleep equals wellness, which equals productivity. And I wonder how many kids would try to tie those together. And I think it would get us to that sophistication point, especially because we see that happening a few times within the sources. And it wouldn't be a one-time thing, as we know, which won't get to that sophistication point.
For sure.
Yeah.
But that's a great conversation to kind of bring in to help do that. And that's one of the things that we as teachers can do in our classroom. I completely agree. Now, I have to admit, the thing that I find so ridiculous about this picture is that there are the phases of the moon behind it while the light's on brightly. And I'm like, what the heck? The phases of the moon are just on the whiteboard. I'm like, you're really helping with the ambiance of getting me to sleep here. I kind of want to, have a little bit more experience with the daytime nap. I'm going to try to see if I can convince my principal to put a sleep pod in the teacher's room. It's funny because they used to call it the teacher's lounge, but I've never seen a teacher lounging ever. So I don't.
It doesn't exist.
Any other source you want to talk about super quick or in relation to sophistication before we move on to question number 2? If not, then I will scroll down. And feel free to stop me as I'm scrolling because I can always go back to a source. It's not a problem. Okay, here we go. Prompt number 2 here. Okay. And I'll read it and then I'll let y'all talk about it all you want. So here we go. Laura Amy Schultz is a librarian and an author. In 2008, she was the recipient of the Newbery Medal, which is awarded annually by the American Library Association, ALA, for distinguished children's literature. Upon receiving the award for her book, Good Masters, Sweet Ladies, Voices from a Medieval Village, she delivered an acceptance speech at the ALA annual conference. The following is an excerpt from that speech. Read the passage carefully, and then write an essay that analyzes the rhetorical choices that Schultz makes to achieve her purpose of communicating what it is to be a writer. All right, Mario, your kids get this prompt. What do you like? You better focus on this, otherwise you're dead to me, figuratively, of course. What is it?
All you need to do is find 2 strategies. Find 2 choices, not strategies, 2 choices that Schlitz is making. And I think that this is a prompt that's so accessible. Kids will read it and be like, yes, I understand. And miss a lot of what's happening here because it's not like the old days where there are just tons of, we don't see Hypophora just rolling through here, right? But I'm asking my students to look for 2 things, just like we talked about before. Notice the shifts. And even though they're going to rely on, our ethos, logos, pathos, those rhetorical appeals, and we as much as we try to tell them to stay away from that.
Yeah, well, I use Greek on the English exam, right?
Right. I would tell them, if you're going that way, just to describe how or what, like, don't say she uses pathos, say what the feeling is, because from the
Yep.
very beginning, from that anecdote, there's a feeling and there's an emotion attached to this
And
piece.
how she creates it with the anecdote
Mhm.
and other things. Yes. Yes. Sorry to interrupt you, Mario.
No, you're fine.
You're speaking my language.
So that's where I would go
All right.
with my students.
So, Brandon, your students get this. Stephanie, you'll chime in after Brandon. Brandon, your students get this. You're like, hey, you better focus on this in the prompt because it's going to totally help you nail it later on, right? So Mario's like, let's get those choices. We got to get at least 2 out here. Brandon, what's next?
I mean, Mario, really, we could be teaching in the same classroom, I think, and the kids would be, the shift, like
Praise.
it's going to happen. Like they've got to find where where she shifts towards her purpose and towards her ultimate message. The way I put it to students, as immature as it sounds, so if your friend walks up to you in the hallway and says, Tim, we've known each other for so long, but well, whatever comes next is the purpose of the message.
Yeah.
All right. It's not what came before. What came before was just part of my rhetorical choice to butter you up to get you ready. Right. What comes
To
next?
insult Gandalf, and you can't because I love him.
Well, I wasn't. I was just going to say, but I wish you'd shower more often. Right. And so you say that. You say that to kids. You say, but I'm dating your boyfriend, or whatever. And the kids laugh, but that's the thing. And so they got to find that shift. Often we tell them, people say, look for the big but look for anything like that that's going to uh, juxtapose something. So look for the howevers or on the other hands or any of those sorts of things. I've got lists of them on posters that we do. But then the other thing I said, anything that stands out to you and you think, well, why is she telling me that? Anything that you think, well, I didn't need to know that. Then she's telling you that for a reason, and it's probably something to do with one of the appeals, like Mario said. They're probably trying to create an effect, and so it's not just oh well, that's ethos. So, you can't put your finger on ethos. Ethos is an effect. What can you put your finger on in the text that helps to create that effect?
Right.
And before Stephanie goes, I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry.
I did it
This is
before
how we
you
roll.
walked into the test, but once you've read this, my favorite line in this is, why am I telling you this? Oh, because it's
Yes.
important. I'm like, oh yeah, that's where we make our money. And I would hope that my students would catch it and understand the comedic effect of how she's trying to connect with the readers, but connect them to and with her message.
Yep.
Yeah. Because the story makes sense.
And my example with Mario was, talking about the first thing about the kite. I'm like, why is she telling us this about the kite? Like, why does this even matter? Okay, well, she's trying to create an effect.
Yeah.
So go ahead. I'm sorry. So sorry.
And Stephanie, back to the prompt first, and then we can talk about the actual reading parts of the reading itself for sure.
So when we're going through the prompt, the first thing that I noticed when I looked at it was we've got the book for which the award was won, and then we've got the speech that comes from earning it. And so we also see that the book is children's literature. The speech is at the ALA conference. And so I am curious if we're going to see a little bit of confusion in that avenue of the rhetorical situation. So when my students look at it, I want them to really think about that line down there again, like the choices to achieve her purpose of communicating what it is to be a writer. And so immediately she's talking about a kite, and I would hope that their brains were like, wait a minute, this is supposed to be about what it is to be a writer. Why are we talking about flying a kite here? But again, I agree with what Mario said. I think this one is totally attainable and accessible. I do teach my students, like you all, methods of development. I want you to find the cause of this effect. And so I do teach them to use, ethos, logos, pathos as your commentary. You're explaining to me how this other thing creates this impact. And so I want them to put those pieces together, but I want them to link it back to the rhetorical situation. So I can see that you understand why she's doing this. And I really hope exactly what you guys said, that delayed reveal that she pulls in there at the end. I want the students to really see that and kind of hone in on it. But I want them to start talking to me about the extended metaphor in the beginning.
And I also thought too, Stephanie, and I wrote it down here, I was like, because she's a children's writer, this is a lesson for everyone. I said, but especially children. It's graduation season, and we're hearing kids talk about what people told them they could or could not do
Yeah.
at, in these graduation speeches. And I loved how I think that may be a way we hear students connect this purpose to themselves while still saying what it means to be a writer, but also saying what it means to be a writer or a creative or an engineer or a lawyer or whatever else they will want to be, that impossible thing that someone said they could or could not do.
Yeah. For me, when I think about the prompt, before we get more into the message here and choices and whatnot, when I think about the prompt, Stephanie, I like that you brought up the idea that the book itself was listed in the title here. I mean, in the prompt itself, because I got to teach the kids. Listen, just because there's a title there doesn't mean that that's the actual title of the piece. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of times it's kind of like the Benjamin Banneker letter from back in like 2010 when it had Benjamin Banneker. Yeah, it had Banneker, it had Jefferson, and it had Washington. And I'm like, folks, it was Banneker writing to Jefferson. He was not writing to Washington. And that changes things a lot. And so in this case, you've got something really similar here where you got to teach the kids how to mine the prompt for everything that they need. Yes, there's a title there, but that gives you the reason why she was asked to speak here, because she won the award. So the exigence is she's winning the award. This is not the book itself. So we need to call it her address to the ALA and move on from there. So awesome. I also would always make my kids create a what question so they know what to read for. So it says to achieve her purpose of communicating what it is to be a writer. And then, okay, kids are like, oh, hey, look, they gave us the purpose. I'm like, no, because you now need to ask, what is the purpose of what it means to be a writer? If you can't comprehend that, then we're done. Because you need to say that she makes this choice, and this choice. I make my kids do 3. But at least 2. So she makes this choice and this choice in order to highlight that being a writer is blank, which urges the audience to blah, blah, blah. So that's how I kind of build my thesis statement.
And that carries us into, and this may be where you're going, Tim, so feel free to stop me. You've done it before and we're still friends.
But you didn't like it.
The idea that I'm trying to get across to kids that everything is about something else. And so if they can start thinking, in literature, we might call this theme here. I just wanted to think about universal ideas or bigger ideas as they start trying to inch towards what might be some sophistication. The idea that, hey, there's a bigger lesson here. And I don't want to say it that way because I want to come across as moralistic. But there's something bigger here. It's not just about books and writing. What's she really getting at? It's like the argument about borrowing the car from your parents on Friday night is not really about the car or the game. It's about maturity and trust and friendship, things like that, or fear. And so trying to get them to think, okay, what else is going on here? Some kids are ready for it, some kids aren't.
Yeah, right. And so as we start shifting into the passage, then I want to actually talk about how you would teach your kids to start labeling choices. Now, for me, when I teach rhetorical analysis, because it's not a style paper anymore, I would suggest that up until about 2003, it was very much a more style kind of analysis. Now it's really more of a rhetorical purpose type of a thing. The first thing I want to say is I give my kids 6 questions at the beginning of the year that they have to think about while they read. So they break any reading into sections, and they have to say, okay, based on this section, what do I learn about the speaker, the speaker's values, or the speaker's background? And that's, of course, an ethos question without saying ethos. Then the next question is, what do I learn about the speaker's audience, values, backgrounds, desires, beliefs, or needs, which is actually moving towards a pathos question, but it's not. I then have how does this section relate to the argument as a whole? How does this section relate to other sections of the argument that's actually here? And I don't remember the 5th question that I asked, but nonetheless, all of those questions are actually all of the questions that make up every multiple choice question ever. But I just bring this up because if kids had that in the back of their mind while they were reading this, well, they might say at the beginning, why the heck am I reading this story about a kite? But when you get to that line that Mario mentioned earlier where it was like, oh, Let me tell you, because this story makes sense, the kids are going to automatically be like, that's why you ask us, because they put that in a section. They'll be like, I can now answer this question. How does it relate to another section of the text? And that becomes the rhetorical effect. So nonetheless, as we kind of go through this, I just want to know, what would you encourage kids to kind of label, and we're not going to go paragraph by paragraph, but like section by section, beginning third, middle third, end third. How would you encourage kids to label their rhetorical choices without just saying parallel structure, like by labeling devices? You know what I mean? Or just lit terms. How would you encourage your kids to do that?
I would just go ahead, especially it's not just the first third, it goes throughout, but I would start, like you said, from that first third. We keep seeing I. Why is this repetition of I used so often?
Yeah.
And immediately for me, it was all the things that she could not do. And I think that's setting us up for something she will be able to do. So I would ask my students to start thinking, why? I would ask them literally, why is she saying I can't so often? How will that move us? What is that doing for us as an audience, right? How is that helping us move to some place or get to the place where she wants us to be?
Yeah. Stephanie or Brandon?
I think we did the same thing. When we're looking at breaking these prompts down, I really try to get the students to think about, like, when you were in kindergarten and you were sitting crisscross applesauce on the rug, you talked about literature from beginning, middle, and end. And so I let the students decide where is beginning, where is middle, and how do we get to the end. And I think the first thing, once we kind of talked about this, one of my kids said, well, it says I've never been able to get a kite in the air. And immediately I knew at the end, this kite was going to be in the air. And so they knew to look for that shift. And then the other type of shift that I think our students, or that my students kind of talked about, is that time shift that occurs too. So they recognized in the beginning, she's starting out as a failure, which so many of us kind of do, which I think as we move into talking about commentary, we look at internalized failure in those types of situations. And so that time shift kind of takes us to the middle, if you will, of the text, and we can talk about what's happening there. And one of the things that my student said that I just loved was, when it said 2 years later, I won the Newbery Medal, I realized this was an extended metaphor and I needed to go back and pay more attention. And I was like, that's great. There's a signal in here that says to us, hey, we should have noticed this. So that's how we look at it, and we kind of break it down in that manner.
Yeah, I think about what you guys were talking about. Hold on 1 second. I have to just do something here in the chat. But when it comes to this particular prompt, and I think about Mario talking about the eyes, and we see that first person narration, I know that my kids are naturally drawn towards like talking about lit terms. And I always tell my kids, I want you to tell me that she narrates something here. And Stephanie, you brought it up perfectly because she narrated her consistent failures. And so I'm like, good, can we please write the paragraph? She begins by narrating her consistent failure in order to, and then finish that sentence for me as you write your first body paragraph, right? Or if your kids recognize that this is going to be an extended metaphor and you know that the kite's going in the air, and it says here, even in the fourth paragraph, after all, my life had changed. I was living in a world where anything was possible, right? If the kids realize the extended metaphor, I'm so sick of reading uses an extended metaphor. I really want my kids to turn that into the verb compares. So what is she comparing here? Because what if she were contrasting something here, right? If the kids can identify if it's a comparison or a contrast, they're going to be able to understand the effect much better as opposed to just using. Because if it's a comparison, it's going to be in order to highlight, and you're going to put similarities there. If it's a contrast, you're going to say in order to highlight, and you're going to put the contrasting elements there. And so I would really hope that my kids would, if they pick up on this idea of the extended metaphor that's being developed here, or just labeling it as the failures, seeing that as narration, I could be like, okay, good. And if we see all of those eyes, it's a personal story. She narrates a personal story of her failures in order to. That's kind of one of the ways that I would want my kids to approach beginning talking about this first part here.
What I'm thinking about with the shift, and there's multiple points of shift in here, like Stephanie talked about with the kite's going to be in the air. But if we find that shift where there seems to be a purpose immediately with it, Um, I go to paragraph 7. My
Yep.
hand was cold. I fumbled in my pocket for a glove, and all at once, uh-oh, something happened. Something big happened. And we're in literature now. We're in the narration. But as Stephanie talked about, the methods of development here. All at once, I dropped the spool, and it was then that I made a discovery, quite an obvious one, really. But to me, it was startling and wondrous. As the spool of string rolled over the sand, the kite faltered, plummeted. Without me, she couldn't soar. She needed the tension of my hand on the string. And I would hope that the kids would see, yeah, she says in line 11, in paragraph 11, was like winning the Newbery. But see that, yeah, it wasn't just, I couldn't get it to fly. I got it to fly and I won it. No, I got it to fly, but there were still problems. Like I struggled. There was a lot of work that I still had to do. And that only comes to pass by seeing that shift in that particular spot in the narrative.
And I think like what you were saying, Tim, that comparison comes back into play, like you said also, Brandon,
Mhm.
because once she lets the kite go, it starts to struggle. But the kite can only reach its apex, if you will, if she's holding it, if she
Right.
goes through all those failures to get to that place. And that's how we can compare it to writing, which gets us back to the rhetorical situation that students are asked to do in a task.
And imagine if our students actually learned to feel like this. Like this might be one of the first rhetorical analyses I do with my students from now on, because I can't tell you how often I get the "Is this good? Is this good? Can I do this right the first time every time?" And I'm like, actually, it sucks. Go do it again, right? And I also tell kids, I'm fortunate enough to have met Brandon a few years ago, and Brandon invited me to write a book with him. And I tell him, I'm like, if you think that my chapters in the books that Brandon and I and Lauren and Beth wrote were done in one sitting and at one time. I remember the first day Brandon and I ever wrote together, I scrapped 6 pages that I had produced. 6 pages and started over again, right? And so this might be one of those kind of good things to kind of introduce your year with, and it's incredibly accessible. Oh my gosh, like
Yeah.
so accessible. Um, let's think about the end of. Oh, someone. This is recorded, so you can go back and play that. But because we don't have a lot of time left, and my son's actually in a championship baseball game right now that was scheduled after I scheduled this, so I'm like, oh, we're gonna actually try to hold it to the hour as best we can. Is there anything you want to point out at the end of this here that you're hoping that your kids hang on to before we quickly talk about the argument prompt?
Especially in our current day and age where kids are typing, and we, as you were talking about in the lit session about AI, Brandon, writing is worth it.
Yeah.
All those times where everything is bad, it's worth actually going through that to get our
Yeah.
thoughts out, to share our perspectives.
Yeah, and I mean, with what and I was going to say this a second ago, but I was like, I will move on. But since you bring it up, Mario, I'll say, with in my APSIs, with my AP students, and with my college students, I always use chapters from Anne Lamont's Bird by Bird, and I know she's writing a lot of fiction, but she's got this part that says, "Perfectionism is the voice of the oppressor,"
Hmm.
and the fact that if we think it's going to be perfect the first time, we've got real problems. We just got to get used to it. And she has that chapter called "Crappy First Drafts" that I encourage everyone to read. That just says, hey, you're going to have a bad first draft. Everybody has them. So good advice there too.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying crappy
Absolutely.
on my channel.
Absolutely.
Okay, listen, we're going to go to our third one. And Mario and Stephanie, I hope that you already have next year's prompt chat date on your calendars, because you're invited back, just so you know. I really appreciate your time and what you're doing with us here. But let's look at this last one here. We'll talk about a couple different approaches to it, and then we'll call it a night. So we have in the 2009 keynote address for the annual Biomedical Research Conference for Minority Students, physician, engineer, and former astronaut Mae Jemison, the first African American woman in space, stated, "Never be limited by other people's limited imaginations. If you adopt their attitudes, then the possibility won't exist because you'll already have shut it out. You can hear other people's wisdom, but you've got to reevaluate the world for yourself. Write an essay that argues your position on the extent to which Jemison's claim about considering others' opinions are valid. Stephanie, what's the approach?
We're going to start with what in the world is her claim? We got to
Yeah.
Yep.
start there. Figure out what that claim is, and then I want them to think through times when it works and times when it doesn't work. When we see this word, the position on the extent to which, I want them to look for muddy water and find that qualification in there. See where we can see examples that it's going to work, where it's going to be solid, and find the holes in that, like the loophole to it, so that we can frame it in sort of like a while or an although, and then give me some sort of qualification in there.
Yeah.
Yep.
I would just like to say, though, Stephanie, right, and this might be something where you're going to disagree with me. I will make my kids use while or although and not however, just because my kids in the past have typically leaned towards equivocation if I let them use a coordinating conjunctive adverb. So I will make my kids subordinate so that because of that, one idea will be stronger. And so that's just one of the ways that I will actually try to approach that with my kids. But I think the idea of getting kids in the muddy water is a good thing, especially when you get them into the muddy water by saying, when is this true and when is this not true? Because you actually let them be in their absolutes, but you let them be in their absolutes to get them into the mud. I completely agree.
So I'll go ahead and say, as I started working in the AP world, Alfonso and I will be talking about things like this a lot. I think the muddy water for me, first, my students need to read the question. Everything needs to read the question. Like, that's first.
Yeah.
Secondly, like Stephanie said, the position on the extent to which it's true. But when are people's opinions actually wisdom?
Yeah.
Is
Oh,
where.
what a great question.
Yeah.
Right. That's where I'm going. When are people's opinions actually wisdom, and when are they just opinions? Especially for the students who live in a podcast world, in a YouTube world, where everyone is saying everything. How much of that should we just absorb, or how much of that should we just ignore?
And when I'll kind of go to the next level with this too. When I start thinking, and normally I would say this for later in the discussion, but it's almost the top of the hour. I know. The thing again, what is this really about? So the kids who are to that point where they can make this argument, they can make this claim, but they can go a little bit further with it and say, what's this really about? It's not just about opinions. There's something here. I would hope they would see about trusting yourself.
Mm-hmm.
There's something in here about the wisdom of the masses too, and really be able to think, that there's something bigger here that they could talk about, and they could talk about those things or possibly some other things, some other angles with it too, while they're still answering the question. Of course, we don't want that philosophy paper where the kid goes off and talks about the big idea or universal idea, but doesn't answer the question. That's when all this goes wrong, right?
So the other thing too that I have to really stress with my students, particularly if I'm going to bring this in at the beginning of the year, is when it says argue your position on the extent to which Jemison's claim about considering others' opinions is valid. I think that kids are going to misread this here if they don't put the effort in, because they're just going to be like, "Oh, don't listen to other people's opinions."
Mm-hmm.
That's not what this claim is about at all.
At all.
It's not, and a lot of times kids are like, "I'm going to be my own person. I don't care what other people think," and you kind of hear that attitude coming through, and that just shows a lack of understanding of reading the full prompt. So, Mario, I think, and Stephanie, I think that you're entirely right. Where it's like we got to really dig into there in order to get what we need, because otherwise kids are just going to be like, oh, I don't even need that upper portion. I just need to argue whether or not it's valid to consider other people's opinions when you do stuff. Mm-hmm. And it's like, no. Look at what's said about wisdom, and let's look at what's said about your imagination in actually achieving things, And so I think that's really, really important to kind of dig into the complexity of the prompt, even though it might seem a little bit simplistic. Here's the deal. I'm going to ask one question, and I'm going to put you on the spot, and it might be a little bit hard. But Stephanie, Mario, and Brandon, are you reading at the Lit Reading this year?
Me, I'm reading literature this year, yes.
Oh, okay. So I'm reading Lang. So 3 of us are reading Lang. You're reading Lit. But pretend you're put on the argument prompt. What is one example that you hope to see a kid use in relation to this prompt? So think
Well,
about it.
my own son told me that he in one of his paragraphs he used Eric Cartman as an example of somebody to say, when somebody comes into your world and starts bossing you around, and like Cartman trying to demand that you respect his authority. And he said, Dad, what do you think? Do you think that'll work? I said, well, I would need to read the full essay, but it sounds like you've linked it to the prompt. And so it might work. So if you all see that essay, let me know how it goes.
Gotcha. I'll have to flag that for I know the person at that point, but that's,
Yeah,
yes.
there you go. There you go. So I'll think about your question, and I'll let somebody else answer.
Yeah. So Stephanie and Mario, you're going to think about it. What's one example that you hope that you might actually see?
I was really thinking about like informed citizenship, honestly. How do we bring in things like I love who this one's about, right? I love where it comes from. The idea of a hidden figure, I think, is a great place to find wisdom and knowledge. And so I think it's going to be neat to see that see the students kind of lean in on that concept of um, I don't necessarily want to read a lot about like growth mindset or fixed mindset. I think we're going to see some of that because
Yeah.
it's going to fall naturally in there. I think we're probably going to see a lot of peer pressure too. Students talking about what that looks like. So really, I want to see them pull in things like hidden figures, even some of like I thought of the space exploration with this idea of privatization, which I realize is kind of a throwback to a previous prompt, but with some of the stuff that's happened in our current events, I think that could be an interesting way for our students to take it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry, Tim, I'm hard headed. So you said do one. I have like 1.5.
That's right. I want 1.5. I do.
Right. So the first one I would do, or I think I want to read, is hearing a student talk about their experience being told no. And I mentioned this, I think, a little earlier, because kids get advice all the time about what they should do when
Yeah.
it's not for them. And also, I would say, I tell people, this is me personally, I tell people all the time, my brother, my entire life, hasn't given me the best advice, but I always listened. I always was waiting to see if what he said would come true. And
Yeah.
I would hope students would think about any moment where someone said something and it actually happened, because kids never believe any of the things we tell them anyway, right?
Right.
But
Mhm.
those, when they do believe them and they don't come, like when we've limited them versus how many times I've told you something that may have actually worked out. My 1.5, I'm done now.
Yeah.
That,
So
that
for
brings me back to what mine was, Mario. It would be my actual one, not Eric Cartman. But the Cartman could work. Please remember, the Cartman could work. Please remember.
Yes.
It can.
But the what was parents? I could see, and I'm thinking about this as my own experience, where admittedly I thought, oh my, they're going to start, and they've blown me away. I was the one with the limited imagination,
hmm
and the kid did really, really well. My child did really, really well with this thing. But what you say, Mario, kids get lots of advice or lots of things from parents or teachers or other people in their lives. But the parents came to mind for me. I could see some kids writing about that, and being really meaningful to them with this prompt.
So I actually had two things that I want to read. So Mario, I'm gonna violate two.
Yes.
Number one, I want to hear a success story about a kid's own business. That's what I want to hear. I think that a lot of times kids are told to, when they post stories from their own lives, that it's not the best evidence, because you have English teachers and you should show that you know things about politics and the world around you and things like that. But I really think that this prompt lends itself very well to a personal business success, and I know that there are kids that run excellent businesses, even in high school. So I really want that. But it's funny because in talking about that, I'm thinking a lot recently about this book called Rich Dad Poor Dad, and I hope that there's a kid who brings in Rich Dad Poor Dad, because it's the most perfect example for this prompt. And I'm reading this prompt and I'm like, oh my word, this is Rich Dad Poor Dad. If any kids ever read that book, then it's going to be like perfect for them as they talk about this in order to kind of create this element there. So anyway, with that being said, listen, Brandon, we'll talk a million times over, I'm sure, about that. Stephanie and Mario, I will see you at the reading in just a few weeks, and I'm looking forward to that as well. Stephanie, I do need you to send me a text after this with your shirt size. I'll bring a Garden of English shirt for you, assuming that I've got some leftovers in my closet, and I got to make sure I have all my sizes. But Mario, I already got one for him. I got one for Jim Jordan, who joined up with us too, so I want to make sure that I bring one for you as well, if you want one, that is.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, there we go. So listen, I appreciate all your time. I'm going to go to my son's baseball game, and I hope you all have beautiful evenings.
Good luck to him. You have a great one.
All right, have a great one, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.